Today is Friday, November 21st, and you have found the Living Youth Podcast. My name is John Robinson, here again with podcast co-host Mr. Wallace G. Smith. Mr. Smith, like it or not, the American holiday, Thanksgiving, is upon us. I'm going to go down to Texas to see my mom and my family.
Yeah, good for you. That's good.
Do you have any big plans?
I do. Well, first, let me say, like it or not, like it. I mean, definitely like it. I very much like Thanksgiving. And we do have plans. We're really having family and friends over and looking forward to that. My wife always plans a lot of great food, and I'm looking forward to sticking to my diet and not eating too much of it. But I'm very much looking forward to Thanksgiving, yes.
Mrs. Smith's Thanksgiving innovation, which is don't just do a turkey, do a tenderloin as well.
That's right. We will celebrate a larger variety of dead animals. That's right.
So today, this topic has nothing to do with Thanksgiving.
It does not. We kind of talked about that last podcast on ingratitude. If you haven't heard that one, we encourage you to go do so.
You and I have bandied this idea around for quite a while, and I think we finally, some pieces fell into place. We thought maybe this was the time to talk about it. What's on our mind today?
All right, today we want to focus on this kind of mistaken belief, and you may not ever think of it as a hardcore specific belief, but functionally it is, especially in the West and in America in particular, but not just here. And that is this idea that you can have this kind of personal life that doesn't impact others, that somehow it's like, this is private, it's inside, it's just me, it's just mine, it doesn't have anything to do with anybody else. And the fact is, what is inside always comes outside. And so today we thought we want to talk about that. Welcome back, and thank you for hanging through the music, especially as Mr. Robinson and I acknowledge that was a very mediocre introduction. However, we're not under illusions. We know they're not all home runs.
That's right.
But that theme, this idea, and like I said especially American, but in Western civilization in general, that somehow you can separate this private personal space from the outer space, such that we can say things like, "Oh, nobody cares what you do in private," which, yeah, we want people to have their privacy, but the idea that what is done in private and the kind of lives we live in private, that doesn't affect the rest of society, or that we can kind of keep things truly just to ourselves and it doesn't impact anybody else, that is just a radical misunderstanding that impacts us both personally and on the level of civilization. And we've long thought that it would be a worthwhile example, right, Mr. Robinson?
Yes, exactly. And one of the ways this caught my attention, well, there's actually a couple things. One, there was let's try not to have this go political, okay? But I remember one of the presidents of the United States was having a scandal unfold, but he assured all Americans that what he does in his private life doesn't spill over into his job as the president. And even at the time, I was like, that seems unlikely that would be the case. But let me explain by way of actually apologizing to Ben Shapiro.
Oh, now, an apology.
Ben Shapiro, I for some reason I had not properly understood his position, and I thought he was at times advocating this kind of idea of, look, I don't even care. I don't care what you do in your personal life. In other words, at your home, kind of whatever you do, that's your business. But in my research to try to find that quote, I found just not quite the opposite,
but almost.
And so anytime in the past, we try not to mention in general people directly, but I misattributed some quotes to him that were not correct. And so he does not actually think that. So like the nearest quote I could get, he says, what you do in your bedroom is between your partner and God. And he was saying that it's not that he doesn't care, but it shouldn't be a public spectacle, and that God still does care what you do. And
interesting.
And then another one was something along the lines of, it does matter, but he doesn't want the government getting involved in things like that. So okay. that was a lot of it. So if you try to find quotes, what you'll find is that people attribute those quotes to him, but when you actually look it out, it's not ever something he actually said. It's almost like somebody took something he said, kind of said, this is what he's saying, and then people started quoting that. So my apologies to Mr. Shapiro. And one of the reasons I was disappointed, because he is an Orthodox Jew. I thought of all people, he should know better than what you do in your personal life will have an impact on the community.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that because one a famous and credible situation, one that actually, I say credible like you're not very credible, Mr. Robinson, but an actual more recent case was when Mr. Dennis Prager came out, not all that condemning about pornography.
Right.
That really was sort of shocking because
Yeah.
he's such a generally conservative fellow, seems to stand up for values, had all these great videos about the 10 Commandments. But then overall was saying, if you consume pornography, as long as you don't actually commit adultery and this and that, it's not as big a deal. And just seemed like an act of rejection of what Christ teaches us, that no, the Spirit does matter. You really do want to attend to those things. And so they're definitely, and I would say it's a very Western kind of thinking to a certain extent,
Yes.
especially in the West. And as I've mentioned, and I don't mean to keep harping about America, but I feel like because of the radical focus and enshrining of individual liberty in the United States, it's almost like the perfect laboratory for what these things represent. What comes of a civilization if we draw this hard line and say, hey, whatever, you and your house, that is your business. That's completely your call. It's only the stuff on the outside that makes a difference, or that we're going to regulate and such. That America is kind of a laboratory of that sort of thinking. And there's a reason that stuff tends to take off here, like, transgender things and the rest, because this is sort of a laboratory of this idea that you can somehow separate the inner world,
Yes,
where right and wrong kind of dwell in one way, and this outer world. And we can fall prey to that. And I remember one really innocent person coming up to me once and who wanted to start a YouTube channel, a very young person, this many years ago, and kind of wanted to have a certain style, but knew it was not an acceptable style for the rest of us in the church, that it would really be not just a style. I would just say there might be some words used in other things. That said, well, I understand. Can I have a YouTube channel where I use words like this? Let's just say certain foul languages. Use things like this, but not. I wouldn't never say that in church. And this idea that you can have some kind of private life that you can insulate in a way that doesn't affect the outside, that the inside can somehow be different than the outside, and that won't impact those close to you, and truly in a very real way all of civilization, that is just a myth. That's not true. The interior always impacts the exterior, as we'll talk about.
And that's what was Jesus Christ's main point when the Pharisees were asking him why his disciples didn't wash their hands. And they meant ceremonially. They had a method by which they did it. But Christ took that as an opportunity to explain, hey, look, what's on the outside, or what's on the inside is reflected on the outside.
Right.
And them, they try to he uses the term of a whitewashed tomb. And like I think it was once a year they would go around and whitewash all the tombs so that nobody accidentally ceremonially defiled themselves.
Interesting.
But so it looks okay on the outside, but what's on the inside? Dead men's bones.
Yeah, a bunch of rotting corpses. That's right. So this idea that we can have an inner life that won't somehow affect everybody on the outside is just a myth. And it's there's more than one reason, but it's one of the reasons that God really focuses us not just on the actions of our arms and our legs and our hands, kind of like the spirit of what at least some takes are on what Mr. Prager was saying, but that no, God actually does focus on the condition of the heart and matters of private behavior, and that those absolutely must be tended and shepherded. That whether you're a president or not, the fact is, yes, your character, your inner character, will end up impacting those around you. And I like how Mr. Robinson kind of thought about this, looking at the notes in an actually a very basic kind of scale in terms of how thought is always the precursor to action.
Yes, Mr. Smith, that's right. I remember I was walking outside just trying to get a little exercise in the morning, and was listening to a podcast, and the podcast I was listening to said this, and it's rare that I actually stop listening to something and just think about it. And that made me stop in my tracks, and it's such an easy and simple concept. Listeners might even think, well, why is that so mind-boggling to you? And it's just I had never thought of it in that regard.
Yeah.
That we don't start to do anything that we haven't thought about doing. Like our mind's like, hey, you're hungry. Why don't you go get a sandwich? And then we begin to take action. This is different than when you get surprised or you see a snake or something that causes an involuntary reflex of just danger,
Right.
safety.
Even then, I guess the impulse journeys like straight to your spinal cord or something. It doesn't have to involve the brain a whole lot, but even then, there's some kind of internal condition
Boy,
that's
a
done.
whole interesting thing.
It
there
is.
too.
It is.
But anyway, just that. So then, therefore, that means like whatever we've been dwelling on or thinking about, we mentioned that in the making sure we're not unthankful. That's one of the things that we're counseled by God through Paul in that case, that to dwell on good things and don't think about bad things. But anyway, that just this I think one of the best examples of this to me was actually the character of Cain, because I always thought it was weird when I was younger about that story that wow, it just feels like one day Cain was kind of out of sorts and attacked his brother and killed him, and then because the story is so short overall and so simple, and then but the other areas of the Bible really bring out that that's not how we work, that. In fact, I should have looked this up as well. But the idea of the golden rule actually begins in Deuteronomy, where it says we're not supposed to hate our brother.
Right.
And that gives us some key insight into the thinking of somebody like Cain. Like he had been bothered by his brother for some time, and the way his brother was like to him, the Mr. Goody Two Shoes, and always doing the right thing. And here's okay, of course God accepts his sacrifice, and he's just getting tired of it, and he brooded about this for a long time until one day he just snapped. But like, it's not because one day he was, again, just like grumpy with his brother who he thinks said something insensitive. It's like this had been on his mind for a while.
Right. What eventually happened was the result of his brooding, that it started on the inside and eventually manifested on the outside.
So we don't need to read it, but like a good example of this to me was the troubling story of Tamar and Amnon, and Amnon developed this obsession about his half sister Tamar, and he fretted over
the family of
so
David,
much.
right? Yeah, the house of David.
Right there. Thank you. I should have provided more context. Both David's children, but different moms. And it affected him. This brooding or his obsession for his half sister was so great that you could see it, you could recognize it. He looked like he was ill, and his friend says, "Why do you look like you're ill? What's going on?"
Right. It wasn't just on the inside; it manifested on the outside.
And then what's even more interesting is he actually got his way and did what he wanted, and it didn't make him feel any better.
Exactly.
It was worse.
Yeah, his condition was even worse afterwards, I would say. Yeah, I think that's a great example. It makes me think of, well, I guess some could say, well, then maybe you just keep it inside better. Maybe somehow that's the inner condition, but maybe you just kind of put up walls and stuff. But I feel like that Jesus Christ guarantees us that is not going to be the case. When I see in Luke chapter 6, for instance, and I know he says this in other Gospels as well, but I like the concision of having it in just one verse here in Luke 6. In Luke 6 and verse 45, Jesus says very plainly, "A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth evil. For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks." And to me, it's very plain what he's saying is very much what you're saying. He's not just saying that, well, a guy wants to do good things, so he's going to go to his heart and dig something out, and it's going to be something good, and he's going to bring it out. He said, no, it all really starts in the heart. You've got good things treasured up in your heart, or you have evil things treasured up in your heart, and you're not going to be able to help yourself but bring out what's there. And he says it's not in a sense a matter of choice, as he concludes, for it's out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks.
Right. That's a good distinction when you think about it, because look, let's say you're grumpy and somebody does something particularly irritating, and what flitters through your mind is not the most Christian idea.
Right.
But later you're like, that wasn't that big a deal, and I'm okay. And like that's it, and you move on with your life. Versus this abundance idea, which is
the thing is, so you have that kind of thought, well, Mr. Gwynn used to say pretty often there in services, what do you feed it or starve it? You got to make a choice. And if we feed those things, they do get larger, but we should choose to starve those things. The way I was kind of wording it, and I find this wording helpful for me, even if it seems an oversimplification. I don't think functionally that it is. I think it's effective, is the idea that the inside is the outside. That is, even if you don't see it immediately, what is on the inside always finds its way to the outside.
Yes.
There's a lyric in a song, and I like the lyric. I don't want to bring up the author or anything like that. Is different material, not all would probably be good, but I know the lyric really stuck with me when I heard it, which is that something to the effect of, I may not get it quite right, but the journey from your mind to your hands is shorter than you're thinking.
That's
You
good.
think you can entertain all these thoughts inside, but your hands and your legs aren't going to cause any harm. They're not going to act on these things you're thinking, whether it's anger, whether it's lust, whether it's envy, whatever. But the fact is, the journey there from your thoughts in your mind to your hands, it is way shorter than you will always give it credit for. And those things will find a way. I really liked your example of Amnon there, because I had forgotten about that element, that people could literally see it on the outside of him. And it's easy to think, oh, no, I'm kind of hiding it all. It's like, no, it is going to make its way out. And that can be terrifying for us, because none of us are perfect, right? All of us have things. Mr. Robinson and I were talking, when the podcast wasn't recording, we were talking about various experiences in the past with bad language. And I grew up with, I think I've mentioned before, surrounded by a lot of bad language and indulged in it as a dumb young kid for quite some time. And even now, here I'm in my mid-50s, and I will find a word pop into my brain every once in a while from that past. And it always terrified. What if that word ever comes out of my mouth, And so I'll talk to God about it and say, hey, God, I am so sorry. There it is again. Please help me completely clean those things out. And I'm grateful. Over the years, indeed, it has been a constant diluting. It doesn't happen nearly as much as it used to, but I don't take it for granted, because I know eventually what's on the inside pops out.
First of all, I appreciate your humility and boldness in sharing that story. I think about that too. Think about the inner monologue going on in your head, and what's being said in your head, and you think, oh, it's just in my head. I can keep it in there, and then, hammer, meet thumb, which I did finally do once, and that sounds like a weird way to put it. And the hype is real. Hitting your thumb with a hammer is pretty awful.
It's like, you're in such pain that all the guards that normally are there are gone, and whatever's inside that brain of yours that wants to express its disappointment in what you have chosen to do by hammering your thumb with that suddenly decide to express themselves.
Okay, I have one example that I think, I've used it before.
Okay,
I think is one of the best examples in the Bible in terms of somebody did something. So in this case, so what? Here, let's. You're right. I'm bad about not setting up the context always. So in Joshua,
you said that like, oh, you're right. I'm bad about this. Like, well, I never said you were bad about that, Mr. Robinson. But no, I get what you're saying. All right, go ahead.
All right. So the book of Joshua, you have the children of Israel finally entering the promised land. They cross the River Jordan at flood stage, and as it's parted by God. And the first town, it's not even a town, it's probably the biggest city there, the fortified city of Jericho. And one of the things that God tells them very specifically to do is not to take, there's some specific instructions, and it's don't take anything. Like certain things will be dedicated to me, but otherwise I want you to destroy everything. Okay. So this is why I think this is a good example. So one person sees some things in the city and decides it's just too tempting. In fact, when we get to it here in just a minute, he used what he's called to account on it by Joshua. He says, I coveted those things.
No, he just straight up says that. Huh?
Yeah. So here you have Achan. They destroyed Jericho. In fact, Joshua 7:20 is where this part of the account comes into play. And he acknowledges, he says, indeed, I have sinned against the Lord God of Israel. And this is what I have done when I saw among the spoils a beautiful Babylonian garment, 200 shekels of silver and a wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels. I coveted them and took them, and there they are hidden in the earth in the midst of my tent with silver under it. So for our point today, which is, you could say, well, what's the big deal? One guy took it. It was hidden among his things. That's his personal business. If he took it, what do we care? Just ignoring the fact that God told him not to do that.
Right.
Well, the response is really quite interesting. And here in a moment, Mr. Smith, I'm actually going to quote you.
Oh boy.
Yeah, you're going to love it.
And we'll see.
And God judges this situation extremely harshly. Let's see, is that the right way to put it?
Judges
I would say so. He does not extend mercy in this case.
Yeah, you're not saying wrongly, but you're saying it was a very strong judgment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why? Because fundamentally, one of the point God was trying to make is in time this will affect the whole community. So that factors into why the punishment occurred that it did, which was the community taking up stones and stoning Achan and his family. And I think they end up burning all those things. And that's kind of the point. Like this any example in the Bible has multiple
layers
exactly. But in this case, I think one of the most key ones is here they are as a community. God is clearly leading them. He gives them specific instructions. One family deviates, doesn't follow the instruction. God knows it, of course. He then causes Israel to lose their next battle, which gets Joshua's attention immediately. He calls out everybody, family by family until they get down to Achan's family, and he's taken things that nobody knows about. And you would think, you could get away with that. And God's like, no, because as we know from 1 Corinthians 5:6, a little leaven leavens the whole lump. This kind of mentality will infect the community over time, and it will become a larger problem. Because especially if somebody else found out that he had done this thing and gotten away with it, well then why can't we do it, right?
Right.
And so then you start getting into the idea of what's stoning. Now I know a lot of people have questions about why God would have, because that seems relatively barbaric to our modern mind. The idea that you would pick up a rock, like just chopping somebody's head off seems quick and clean. I think we can wrap our heads around that. But a whole bunch of people taking up a rock and throwing it at somebody with the intent to kill them is difficult.
Right.
But
we definitely don't do it today. Just for the record, I don't want anybody to be inspired by this. Like, what a good idea. I think I'll do that.
Should we get disclaimer guy on here?
I don't know if he's ever done one for us that says, don't go around stoning people, but let's just say it. Don't stone people. Right. But in the Old Testament, where God was governing their entire civilization directly, he definitely was trying to make points like this.
And the point is, in time, this would affect the community. So here's where I go to what I call the Wallace G. Smith commentary.
Oh boy.
You and I were talking
Slightly
about it
terrified.
And texting back and forth. And if you've never texted with Mr. Smith, you're not even aware of the novel length text that he can send at times.
Now you're bearing my shame.
So here's what he said. And it was so good that I used it in my notes for a sermon that I gave where this story is featured. And Mr. Smith said in his text commentary, one of the points of view that have helped me put certain commands of God and certain orderings of Israel's society under him into perspective is the realization that God makes decisions not just based on the individual and his or her sin, but the impact that such a sin would have on the larger society as a whole. Many sins are like small cancers that grow to devastate the entire society, eroding the pillars of that society, for example, the family, in a way that every little instance must be dealt with harshly, not because the person has necessarily earned a cruel death, but because God needs the entire community committed to preventing the corruption and degradation of the society by the sin. Hence, the communal nature of stoning. Everyone takes part. This is now me briefly speaking.
Okay.
By everybody having to take part in it, it's also somewhat of a communal acknowledgement that this is a problem that has to be dealt with, and we took part in it. But coming back to you, which even a small foothold would indeed corrupt and degrade the society over generations. In fact, I believe that this very act affected permanently the lives of everybody that witnessed it, because when you start getting into Judges, where Joshua spills over into Judges, but that's clearly at the end of his life. And it says that while Joshua was leading, everybody stayed faithful, and even the other elders that lasted past Joshua,
right.
Again, everybody stayed. And if I'm reading this correctly, it's basically everybody that witnessed what happened with Achan that day. Possibly. It had such an effect on the community, and people remembered that memory never faded, and they continued to do well. But then once the people that had personally firsthand witnessed that event had all died, and then you just have it as a story, well then I'm not saying that's at all why Israel pretty quickly, once they got into the promised land, they were not slow to start sinning when we get to the time of the Judges.
Yeah.
And so anyway, there's other scriptures, I'll just reference one real quick. Where is it here in my notes? It's the idea of let grace be given to the sinner, and he will not learn.
Oh wow, that's a good one. But I don't have it in my copy of your notes. I think you're making it up.
I'm telling you, it's in there. Yeah, it's basically let grace be given to the sinner, and he will not learn. Though he's surrounded by the righteous, it's not enough. But anyway, that's why I think the Achan story is a good one, because the story itself goes in a way that you maybe don't predict. It's one thing for somebody to have taken something and you could see how that was dealt with, but for it to become a community, I don't want to say execution, judgment and execution shows this would have been a community problem in the long run.
Right. Thank you for saving that text. That makes me feel very special that you thought that was a good text, book length text that I sent. And I have thought about that a lot. There is something instructive in Israel's, when it comes to stoning as a method of God enforcing the Old Testament. Of course, things are different now in terms of how we deal with things in the spirit and such. But in that, the idea that for the whole community to participate, it wasn't just God, say, it seemed, punishing the guilty, but that he wanted the society to learn and to invest in the idea that we all have a stake in this not growing amongst us. We all have a stake in this particular attitude or behavior or sin not growing amongst us, because those sins don't stop with that person. They do grow. And you hit one of the verses I was going to bring up later in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, that is the nature of such things. Paul says very plainly there, a little leaven leavens the whole lump. It's not like you put a little leaven into a lump of dough, a new lump of dough, and the new lump of dough somehow overcomes the leavening,
Right.
and suddenly the
Right.
leaven doesn't spread. It's always the opposite.
Yeah.
You put that leavening in and it spreads throughout the
Mr.
whole lump,
Wynn
and that's what happens.
Often made that point.
Oh, really?
He said, there in Genesis, whose civilization ended up taking over was Cain's civilization. His way spread and grew. Okay, I found it. Isaiah 26:10. Let grace be shown to the wicked, yet he will not learn righteousness. But I actually like the net version.
The New English translation?
New English translation, because it just makes it so plain. It says, if the wicked are shown mercy, they do not learn about justice. Even in a land where right is rewarded, they act unjustly. They do not see the Lord's majesty revealed. And one of the many points you could make from that is like wicked behavior has to be corrected and
has to be dealt with.
Yep.
Yeah. I also like the verse that you brought up in all of this, that you had it in the notes, and that's from James chapter 4. And I think citing this, we could then take a look at what I think are the sort of two divisions of this. But in James chapter 4, he speaks very plainly. So that's one of the many nice things about James's letter. He's very plain spoken.
He is quite.
And in verse 1, he says, "Where do wars and fights come from among you?" Now here he's talking about individuals fighting, arguing, and you could even expand that in terms of the broad, wide world. But where do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your desires for pleasure that war in your members? He's boiling it down to what's inside them as individuals. He says in verse 2, you lust and you don't have. You murder and covet and you can't obtain. I don't think he's literally meaning they were murdering each other with knives. That would be a very rough congregation to be in. But in terms of hate, as the spirit of murder, it's happening. He says, you fight and war, yet you do not have because you don't ask. You ask and don't receive because you ask amiss, that you may spend it on your pleasures. That is, you're not attending to the interior part of you, and as a result, look at the outer congregation. Look at the rest of you. It's in turmoil. You need to attend to the inner part. I really do think that the inside is the outside. That the inside inevitably always makes its way to the outside. What you do in private always manifests in some kind of way, like you mentioned about Cain. And so I kind of see that as a warning and as a prompt. It doesn't have to be something negative, but because as I try to bring up some examples, it happens with the good as well, but both on a personal level and a societal level. On a personal level, we have to recognize that what is in our heart never stays inside our heart. Like that proverb I mention often, because I remember my son Michael was the one that brought it to my attention, how we're admonished by Scripture to guard our heart, because out of it are the issues of life. It's like the fountain source of everything in our life in terms of things flowing into the rest of our life. And just like what Jesus said, that it's out of our heart that we're pulling all the things we do on the outside. So on a personal level, it's what's in our heart that is eventually shown on the outside. And that doesn't have to be bad. It can be good. If you, with God's help, have established a remarkable peace of mind, or you just are really great at loving and caring for other people, or if you're a person who on the inside naturally respects other people, you honor them and recognize them for the value they possess as a child of God, you can't have those things in your heart and not actually end up showing it on the outside.
Right.
People are going to notice how respectful you are. Even as you take in information about individuals, you're going to filter it through the things that you've got there in your heart. You're going to be more inclined to think well of someone based on what you hear than to think terribly of them. As you speak to others, those interior moments, the interior dialogues that have accompanied all of those attitudes, it's going to shape what you say. So your words are either seasoned with grace or not. Even how you choose your time. You say, well, I know what I need to do. I've got this project. I got this to do. I got to paint the house, whatever you got to do. But the fact is, it's your interior world. It's the priorities you make there that are going to impact that. And so, for instance, if you truly do care about individuals, well, then maybe you'll end up talking with your mother on the phone another 10 minutes longer than you would. I know it seems like a tiny difference, but what I'm trying to say is the idea that your interior world won't have even the fingerprints on the outside of your life from the smallest to the largest is just an illusion. It's always going to be that way, but it's also the reverse. If you're filled with covetousness or lust and you engage in pornography, if you lack humility, or if you're filled with anger, it's definitely going to come out. If you are filled with let's say a lack of respect for other people, you're just inherently, you're not respectful. You can paint a veneer of respect all you want. You can make the words of respect. You can sound respectful, but it will inevitably show up on the outside, whether it's going to be a tone of voice, whether it's going to be that one moment where you don't say that nice thing that everybody else is saying.
Right.
And that's part of the lesson we're trying to say, is that you will not be able to keep things interior. You need to, if you see something like that on the inside, that you're just profoundly a disrespectful person, don't ignore that. Yeah. Tend to it, because it will make its way to the outside.
You know, if you think about it, like, exactly right. We're not even always aware of how we're actually projecting something. And I remember one time something really had happened that was quite disappointing to me. And about 5 or 10 minutes later, I was somewhere with a person who knew me, and I didn't even say a word. He said, "Are you okay?" I was like, "Come on, I'm hiding it better than that," and I wasn't. And and then some of your other comments, which by the way I was not, but I did that to actually help me get over it. I was like, "There's no reason to be that upset about that," and so it helped.
Well, good. His comment kind of prompted you in a kind of nice way. Good.
Well, some of your comments here reminded me of, especially in the positive aspects of it. Mr. Armstrong, probably still to this day, the best simple definition of love being outflowing concern.
Yeah.
And if it's outflowing from you, where's the fountain?
It's got to start somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, look at you, Mr. Robinson. Very nice. Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up Cain, because I hadn't thought about that. But that example, even when God, and of course God sees the heart, but when God decides to intervene with Cain, he asks him, well, why has your countenance fallen? He asks him about the look on his face, because Cain, it can't stay inside. It's going to show up, you know.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
So that's on the personal level. And so, yeah, we should attend to such things. But part of the thing we really want to get across today, in this kind of a burst of a podcast today, is that it actually inevitably affects others as well. It does not stop at you. It's impossible to make waves and somehow just decide, well, we don't want these waves to radiate into the rest of the world. And I like to say this sometimes, that when we think about the health of any organization, the health of maybe it's our family, maybe it's in this case all of society. Well, in all those cases, let's say society, it's made up of individual people. And in fact, especially in Western countries where the people determine their leaders, the people determine what's going on in the culture, in terms of the trends, et cetera, then the health of that society is going to be very dependent upon the health of the individuals. And I'm thinking here of an internal health and an attitudinal health, if I can say it that way. And so what happens to the individual is going to affect others. You will impact other people. Like even the little examples, go to the tiniest examples where you're just in a certain mood and maybe you cut short your discussion with your mother or father on the phone by 10 minutes. Well, maybe that means nothing. But at the same time, maybe it was sensed just a little bit that you were a bit off or that, whatever. And so maybe that affects her attitude or his attitude if it's your father a little bit that day or something. So even in small ways. But at the same time, even it's just some attitude at home, it starts to show up. Your children see it. If you're a parent, if you don't think your children aren't impacted by what they pick up from you, not just what you say, but the vibe they pick up from you, believe me, they are. They will be impacted, their children impacted, and it just goes on from there.
I have a great example.
Do you really, Mr. Robin? I'd love great examples.
Okay. So I was actually, the way you said that made me start thinking about it, and I realized this is probably almost 15 years ago. It features my daughter Maddie, and she would have been 10. So this seems all to line up. Well, when I was a little bit younger, and I had more time for it, I always watched the Dallas Cowboys play on Sunday. And that year,
my family did too.
Their team. The team was good enough that you had an expectation it would win, and it was disappointing when they would lose. And we only had over the air, and so I had a TV, believe it or not, out in the garage where I would watch the game over the air. I find out years later that Maddie would pray that the Cowboys would win so I wasn't in a bad mood.
Really? Wow.
And you know what's funny is I remember thinking that the win and loss of the Dallas Cowboys affected me way more than it should. I realized it was irrational to be that upset when they would lose. And so I did actually, to give myself some credit, consciously take some steps to kind of decouple from that. But to your point, Maddie 100% picked up on.
So it was impacting her enough to the point that she's praying about a Cowboy game because she's going to be impacted by the result of that game.
I didn't go off on some raving lunatic just saying stuff.
Throwing a bowl of Fritos on the wall.
But I was clearly grumpy about it, and she picked up on it at 10 and asked God for help. But God didn't care if the Cowboys won or not. But.
That's exactly right. But I bet he did care about that little girl. Yep. That is. It's difficult because here in the United States, part of the way the country is structured is that the government doesn't have the right to kind of come into your life and to say, hey, we've heard reports, Mr. Robinson, that you get in a bit of a bad attitude when the Cowboys lose, and so we're going to take you to bad attitude jail or something. Who would trust any kind of just civil government to somehow manage such things? And yet at the same time, the American sense, and I'd say generally a Western sense, but certainly American sense, that somehow you can have this kind of private life. It doesn't make a difference. Who cares what you consume? I don't care what media do. It's if you don't like it, don't watch it, right? Well, on one hand, we tend not to want a government to regulate that because we don't trust our human governments. And on the other side, on the other hand, being unregulated, it will impact everybody. Like, for instance, do I want the government getting involved and making decisions about family structure? Say, well, you've got too few kids, or you got too many, or look, it's too late for you to be married, or whatever case. I don't trust human government. I don't put my trust in a king in that kind of way. And yet at the same time, so as a result, we have people, say, living together here and there. So let's say that is living together without the benefit of marriage, couples. Well, so we think, well, okay, they have the right to do that. It is, I don't want all society doing that. It's immoral. But, hey, I can't control what they do. They're going to do that. Well, you think that one couple living together doesn't inspire other couples to do so? Yep. That if they do choose to have children and miraculously somehow stay together, You don't think that impacts their children's decision as to whether maybe not all of them would agree with what mom and dad did, but a little leaven leavens the whole lump. It always spreads. And part of what we're trying to argue here is not to get caught up in that idea that we truly do have some kind of rock solid private world that only impacts us, when the real fact is, no, actually, we always impact everyone.
Yeah.
And we can't afford that kind of vain thinking.
Your comments just now actually reminded me of a scripture, because like you said, if two people cohabitate, like, well, what's the big deal? But inspiring other people to do things reminded me of the last couple of verses of Romans 1. God's going through this list of all this inappropriate behavior, and he says, yes, these wicked people deserve, with the righteous judgment of God, that they deserve death for those activities. Not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. In other words, God lumps in. I've thought about this many times with how progressive our society has become over the last 20, 30 years in particular. You don't have to engage in some of these inappropriate behaviors, but if you're supportive of it, God lumps you in with an overall guilt for. And I think about that all the time, and that, like, just my own personal thoughts, which nobody could ever know about, as we've learned on this podcast. But like all these little instances where people thinking they're being virtuous, kind of the virtue signaling thing, supportive of these what is considered now the right thing to do. It really is, as God is inspired in several different areas. Up is down, evil is good, and vice versa.
Yeah, the world is messed up.
But be very careful what you lend your support to, because you could very easily be falling under this kind of Romans 1 judgment here of actually, what's another one? You strengthen the hand of the evildoer when you support them.
And all this might seem despairing to anyone who actually attends to themselves, because I know I look inside myself and I don't see just good things. I see a lot of things that I am still looking forward to getting rid of, but we don't mean it to be that way, because the fact is, this is exactly the business that God the Father and Jesus Christ are in. They are not just in some business of just trying to kind of control our arms and legs. No, they're literally in the business of transforming hearts and changing minds. And there's nothing like kneeling before God and just humbly saying, God, I know there's things in me that I don't like, and I know there's things in me that maybe I've entertained, but I know that they're impacting other people, and I know they're impacting me in ways I like to pretend that they're not. Please jump in with me. Please work with me. Please help me to change those things. So we're not trying to cause you any kind of despair in that sense. What we are trying to do is to make sure we're not trapped in this kind of Westernish idea that you somehow can have a purely private life and a purely public life. The fact is, the inside is the outside. There really is no true boundary in that sense. And it's not that you can't have any secrets, or you can't confide in someone or something. I confide in Mr. Robinson all the time, whether he wants me to or not. We're not saying that. What we are saying is the kind of people we really are, and all of us are imperfect. The kind of people we really are on the inside is going to have an impact on the outside around us. And so the challenge is to one, understand that, to embrace that, not take it for granted, and to recognize the inside is the outside, and ask God to help transform that inside too. Not just to think, oh, I succeeded because nobody saw me be this way, but I think, well, no, I need to be the best person I can be inside. I need to be what God wants me to be. I need to reflect Jesus Christ better on the inside, so that I can have the kind of impact on the outside that I want to in the world.
Which might even mean removing yourself from a toxic environment. Like I had a job situation once where it was actually only about a 2-week window, where it was probably one of the most stressful times I'd ever had at work. And my buddy was like, hey, do you want to come play basketball? Which sounded great. Like, just do something active. And we went out there, and it didn't really come close to getting into a fight with other people, but it got contentious.
Really?
And I realized, and I remember my buddy later telling me that he told them, he's like, hey, he's never like that. And I realized that work at stress had really filtered through me and was affecting what I was doing and playing basketball. I was more aggressive than usual and some different things like that. But even just in terms of, again, going back to these principles where where Paul is admonishing us to focus on positive things. Like I had a different work environment that had gotten so toxic that when I finally got a new job, again, I didn't realize how much it was affecting me. And so, trying to give tips for, well, what do you do if you're having a lot of negative thinking? Well, and this is not psychological advice, by the way, and we're not treating depression or anxiety, but if you feel, well, how do I improve in this area? Really, a lot of what we surround ourselves with and take in is going to affect us positively or negatively. I know that's kind of obvious in what we've been saying, but I mean, if there's a really, really toxic personality in your life, do what you can to minimize being around that person. And
oh yeah, that is interesting. Your comment, because let's just say I've never played a pickup game of basketball, Mr. Robinson. However, I did once. I was in theater. I was in a competition where we you do have duets, not singing duets. Nobody wants to hear me sing a duet, but acting duets, where you pick a scene for two people and then you actually go to competitions and act those scenes. Yeah, believe it or not, there's a whole competitive theater. So anyway, I really enjoyed that. I always enjoyed that kind of doing duets with someone. And so a friend of mine and I had a duet where the character I was playing for that bit was angry, would really get angry about something. I can't remember. And so I remember rehearsing it and, kind of going over. The other person wasn't there. I was just going through my lines. And anyway, then I stopped and I was going to get I was in high school. I was going to make myself a sandwich or something. Went and started getting stuff for the sandwich and kind of slam it on the table, and I went to go get the TV tray I was going to eat in the living room. And I remember slamming the closet door and it hit me. It's like, what am I doing? Why am I walking around in such a mood? Well, it was all just it wasn't even real, right? It was something imaginary, and yet it had me in that mood. Again, what was on the inside made its way to the outside. And maybe that's where we can go, Mr. Robinson, here at the end, because what I hear you saying is, because it's one thing, it's like we try to control our arms and legs. We try to make sure we're physically doing the right things. And yet we still find ourselves kind of slipping up and maybe hurting people or saying things we wish we hadn't have said. Well, maybe it's because it's a matter of tending our heart. So what can we do? Because that sounds like a big job. Well, let me say it is a big job. That's part of why we've got God's own help, right? We need someone who's capable of sticking their hands in and doing big things. But at the same time, what Mr. Robinson just highlighted is kind of important. One of the let's just talk about a first step you can take, and we'll leave it with that, is stop being fed those things that tend to have those kind of influences. If we're struggling with foul language, don't listen to a bunch of stuff that has foul language in it. If we're struggling with angry thoughts, don't feed angry thoughts in what we consume. Truly examine the stuff that we're taking in and try to understand the impact that it could have and learn to filter those things. The Bible says that evil company corrupts good habits. Doesn't have to be evil company in terms of people. That can be evil company in terms of music, in terms of the cartoons, animated shows, TV shows, dramas we watch. Examine all of that for what it truly is and be willing to give up those things that have a negative impact. I'll go ahead and reference that verse here at the end that I mentioned my son really likes so much. It's in Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23. It says, keep your heart. Think of that as protecting your heart, watching over it, being mindful of what comes into it. Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life. That is, the waters of your life are flowing from that one location. And if you don't like the waters coming out of it, if they seem like they're tainted in some way, if you see yourself, you see others around you, now that you're paying attention, swimming in waters that you don't like, then don't corrupt that well. The best thing you can do as a first step is to be careful of what you're putting in it, because the inside will be the outside.
Smith and Robinson.